For almost 10 years, they told the world their marriage worked precisely because it broke every rule a marriage was supposed to follow. No fairy tale, no pretending, just two people who had survived things most couples never talk about, choosing each other anyway. So when the divorce papers actually showed up in a Tennessee courthouse, it did not feel like ordinary celebrity news. It felt like watching the one couple everybody pointed to as proof that love could survive anything suddenly prove the opposite. And the strangest part is that neither of them is hiding from it. Bunnie XO has been talking about it openly on her own podcast. Jelly Roll has said his piece too. And what they are both describing is not the scandal people expected. It is something quieter, messier, and honestly a lot more relatable than anyone predicted. Just months before any of this became public, the two of them were still doing exactly what they had always done, showing up for each other in front of everyone. At the Grammys in February, they walked the red carpet together, visibly affectionate. And when Jelly Roll won his award for Best Contemporary Country Album that night, he thanked her from the stage. That was not new. He had spent years crediting her publicly as the reason he was even standing in rooms like that. So when court records surfaced showing he had filed for divorce back in May, in Williamson County, Tennessee, it landed like a contradiction nobody could immediately explain. This was not a couple who had gone quiet on each other. Up until days before the filing became public knowledge, they still looked like a team. At first, almost nothing was confirmed. There was no joint statement, no press release, just court paperwork that had quietly existed for weeks before anyone outside their circle knew about it. Photographers caught moving trucks outside their Tennessee property not long after the news broke, and that image alone told people this was not some symbolic legal formality. Something in their day-to-day life was actually changing fast. For a couple who had built so much of their public identity around transparency, the silence in those first days felt unusual. It left a gap, and into that gap poured every theory fans had come up with. To understand why this breakup confused so many people, you have to go back to where the two of them actually started, because it was about as far from a fairy tale beginning as you can get. Jelly Roll, whose real name is Jason Ford, met Bunnie XO, born Elisa Ford, back in 2015 at one of his shows in Las Vegas. At the time, he was nowhere near the artist filling arenas today. He had already lived through a rough stretch of his life, including a long history of run-ins with the law starting when he was a young teenager, and he was still grinding through small venues trying to build something out of very little. He has said before that he was essentially living out of a van in that period. Bunnie, for her part, was working in the adult entertainment industry at the time they met, and by his own description, what connected them was not fame or image. It was recognizing something honest in each other. Two people who had already lived hard lives before they ever crossed paths. Their relationship moved fast. They did not date for years before deciding to build a life together. Instead, things escalated quickly, and by August 2016, they were married. From the outside, it looked sudden, almost reckless. But both of them have described it differently over the years, framing it less as impulsiveness and more certainty, a sense that whatever pace made sense to everyone else did not have to be their pace. They built their relationship on shared struggle instead of shared comfort. And for a while, that seemed to be exactly what made it strong. But a fast start does not mean an easy road, and only about 2 years into the marriage, that road hit a moment that nearly ended everything. Bunnie has written about this period in detail in her memoir, describing how she began to suspect Jelly Roll was involved with someone else during a rocky stretch in 2018. According to her account, the truth eventually came out through a mutual connection, confirming that he had, in fact, been unfaithful. Bunnie has since described that period as one of the most painful of her life, admitting the emotional weight of it pushed her into a very dark place before she ultimately chose to keep going. She packed her things and returned to Las Vegas for a period of separation that lasted a few months. Jelly Roll himself has openly called that affair one of the worst moments of his adult life, saying in a podcast appearance that discovering how badly he had hurt someone he loved was a turning point he could not ignore. What happened next is a part of their story that made them stand out from so many other celebrity relationships. Instead of walking away for good, they chose to work through it. Bunnie has said she came to believe people are not only defined by their worst decisions, and that belief became the foundation for giving the marriage another chance. Jelly Roll did not dispute what happened or try to minimize it. He has talked publicly about doing what he called real work to repair the relationship, and over time, the two of them slowly rebuilt something that had been badly damaged. It was not instant, and it was not simple, but by 2023, they felt secure enough in that healing to renew their vows, a public statement that they had made it through the hardest chapter of their marriage together. That same period brought a wave of momentum in almost every part of their lives. Jelly Roll's music career had been climbing for years, but it reached new heights, culminating in major recognition, including a Grammy win earlier this year for Best Contemporary Country Album. Alongside his music, he underwent a well-documented health transformation, losing an enormous amount of weight, and Bunnie was consistently vocal about supporting him through it, both online and in interviews. At the same time, Bunnie had grown her own platform substantially through her podcast, stepping fully away from her previous career in 2023 and building a new public identity around her voice, her story, and her relationship with Jelly Roll. On top of the career wins, they were also chasing something deeply personal, a bigger family. The two of them spoke openly about pursuing IVF and surrogacy, explaining that Bunnie was not able to carry a pregnancy herself, and that they had chosen surrogacy as their path toward having a child together. As recently as this past February, around the release of Bunnie's memoir, she was telling interviewers they had already selected a surrogate and were hopeful about welcoming twins. She described feeling like they had finally reached the future they used to talk about in their earliest conversations, the version of their life they had once only dreamed about out loud. They had also been candid about how uncertain that path felt at times. Bunnie once explained on her podcast that surrogacy was not a choice made lightly, and that the process came with real emotional weight and real risk, the kind of thing you cannot fully prepare for no matter how ready you think you are. She talked about placing their trust in the process, and in each other, saying that if things did not work out through surrogacy, they were open to adoption instead. It was a plan built on flexibility rather than a fixed outcome, but the underlying goal never. Wavered. They wanted to be parents together, and they wanted the world to know they were building toward it as a unit, which is exactly why the timeline that followed is so hard for a lot of people to wrap their heads around. Just 3 months after that interview, Jelly Roll filed for divorce. According to Bunnie's own account on her podcast, there was no new affair and no single act of betrayal behind this filing. She has said directly, in her words, that nobody cheated. Instead, what she has described as an argument on Mother's Day that spiraled out of control, one that exposed problems the two of them had apparently never learned how to work through even during the good years. Bunnie has explained that she and Jelly Roll had never been particularly skilled at handling conflict as a couple, that they each tended to bottle things up rather than talk them out, and that this pattern eventually became, in her words, a recipe for disaster. During that specific fight, she has said she told him, in a moment of pure frustration, to go ahead and file the papers. She has admitted she did not actually expect him to do it, but he did, and once it was filed, the two of them did not speak for weeks, while everything sat in limbo. Since then, more detailed reporting has emerged suggesting the roots of the split go beyond a single argument. Multiple entertainment outlets, citing sources close to the couple, have reported that tension had quietly been building around Bunnie's interest in stepping back into some form of the adult entertainment world she had left behind in 2023. Sources describe this as less about any specific plan and more about a growing pull toward a version of her identity that existed before fame reshaped both of their lives. As Jelly Roll's career expanded and his public image became more carefully managed, some reports suggest that conversations about her potential return created real strain between them, not because either person judged the other, but because it symbolized two people wanting increasingly different futures. One source close to the situation put it simply, saying the two of them ultimately wanted different lives. That framing lines up with something Bunnie has said publicly herself, that she always felt she loved her husband slightly more than he loved her in return. She has described their emotional dynamic using the metaphor of a chaser and a runner, saying she was usually the one holding the relationship together while he tended to pull away under pressure. It is a strikingly honest thing to admit publicly, and suggests that whatever ultimately ended the marriage was not one dramatic betrayal, but an imbalance that had quietly existed underneath the surface for a long time, one that finally became too heavy to keep carrying. Despite everything, both of them have been unusually consistent in saying this was not a hostile split. Bunnie described their situation as ending on the best possible terms, and by mid-July, reports confirmed the two had officially finalized their divorce settlement. According to court filings, they divided major shared assets, including property, vehicles, and aircraft, and shared intellectual property tied to their public brand. Jelly Roll reportedly agreed to a one-time financial payment to Bunnie, rather than ongoing alimony, and their agreement includes a clause preventing either of them from speaking negatively about the other going forward. It is, by most accounts, about as amicable as a high-profile divorce can look on paper. And perhaps the most surprising twist in the entire story is that even after finalizing their divorce, they are still moving forward with having a baby together. Bunnie confirmed on her podcast that they are expecting a child through their surrogacy plan and intend to co-parent once the baby arrives. In her words, they are choosing to raise their family as, essentially, one team. Even though the marriage itself has ended, it is an unconventional ending to an unconventional relationship, one that never followed a predictable script from the very beginning. So what actually caused two people who survived infidelity, rebuilt trust from nothing, renewed their vows, and openly planned a family together to end up divorced? Based on everything they have both said publicly, it was not a scandal, and it was not a single decision either of them made alone. It looks instead like something a lot of long-term couples quietly go through, a slow drift between who two people used to be and who they eventually grew into. Jelly Roll became one of the biggest names in country music, carrying a level of scrutiny and public pressure that reshapes how a person shows up in daily life. Bunnie built her own independent platform and, according to reports, began feeling pulled back toward parts of her identity she thought she had left behind. Neither one did anything the other has publicly called a betrayal. They simply changed, and at some point, those changes stopped lining up the way they once did. Their story never asked people to believe in a perfect marriage. From the very beginning, they were open about being flawed, about surviving addiction, infidelity, and personal struggles most people never admit publicly at all. Maybe that is exactly why this divorce feels different from a typical celebrity split. It is not a cautionary tale about hidden secrets finally coming out. It is a much more human ending. Two people who genuinely loved each other, who fought hard to say what they had once before, but who ultimately grew into different versions of themselves that no longer wanted the exact same future. And now, even while legally divorced, they are choosing to build a family together anyway, on their own terms, the same way they built everything else in their relationship from day one. There is also something worth sitting with in how differently this divorce has unfolded compared to the 2018 crisis that nearly ended their marriage the first time. Back then, the damage came from a betrayal, something one person did to the other, and healing it required forgiveness on one side and accountability on the other. This time, according to everything they have both said, there was no villain and no confession required. It was two people who had already forgiven each other for the biggest mistake either of them ever made, only to discover that forgiveness was never actually the hardest part of staying together. Staying aligned on the future, year after year, while both of you keep changing, turned out to be the harder task. That distinction matters, because it means this ending says less about trust and more about timing, growth, and the reality that surviving a crisis together does not guarantee two people will always want the same things once the crisis is behind them. It also says something about how they have chosen to handle the ending itself. There's been no public mudslinging, no dueling interviews trying to win public sympathy, and no attempt by either of them to rewrite the story of their marriage into something uglier than it was. Bunnie has gone out of her way to say nobody cheated, and that there is still love between them. Jelly Roll, for his part, has largely let her lead the public conversation, choosing not to contradict her account or add fuel to the speculation swirling around them. In an industry where breakups often turn into prolonged public battles, the restraint both of them have shown stands out almost as much as the divorce itself. What do you think really changed between them? Do you think they could ever find their way back to each other someday? Or is this truly the end of their story? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you want more breakdowns like this one, make sure to subscribe.